All right, Assalamu Alaikum, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the UIF Podcast, where we're going to spotlight the voices shaping our community and our future. Today, we're joined by two inspiring guests. First is Representative Nabeela Sayed, a trailblazer in Illinois politics and one of the youngest Muslim women ever elected to the state legislature. She's become a powerful advocate for equity, education, and public service, and represents the energy and vision of a new generation of leaders. We're also joined by Faiyaz Hussain, a respected civil rights attorney and policy advocate who has worked at the intersection of law, faith, and public policy. His efforts have helped strengthen religious protections in the workplace through a landmark Supreme Court case, and he's played a key role in shaping national strategies to address Islamophobia. Faiyaz also continues to speak and write on major legal and policy issues impacting Muslim Americans, from digital freedom to civil rights. We're excited to hear from both of them today about their work, their journeys, and what's ahead. And I really, again, want to extend my thanks to both of you for coming on today. This is kind of a special episode in the sense that, usually my co-host Faiyaz Hussain is with me. He's not here today, but the next best thing is, I guess, having his brother, Faiyaz, here with us to discuss this important topic. And really, at the heart of it, before we get into the conversation today, was to really just inspire our community. We have a lot of young professionals who tune in to our podcast, who are also our clients at UIF, and we wanted to bring on some guests who we felt would be able to inspire and give very good information to them that help them to see what is the importance of this topic, right? Being involved in the political system, in democracy in the United States, and so. We'll get started here with this conversation, but, Nabeela, thank you so much for coming on. I know you're extremely busy in terms of, what you're doing in the legislature there in Illinois. But can you start with your background, like where you started from, those who are not familiar with you, and, where you grew up and how you got into this role that you're currently in right now?
Of course. And thank you so much for having me on. It is exciting to be here with you both. For those that are listening that don't know me, my name is Dila Sayed. I am the state representative of the 51st District, which is a suburban community located in Palatine, Hawthorne Woods, Killdeer, Deer Park, Long Grove. And I was born and raised right here in Palatine. When my parents immigrated, they settled down a few places, but when they had me and my brother, they were living in Palatine in a townhome here. And, they put us through the public schools here. We moved around within the same zip code, and they still live here. And I moved away, but I still live in the same zip code. So alhamdulillah, home is home. Can't get too far away from the suburbs. And now I'm elected to represent this community. But growing up, the community that I was raised in, it's a predominantly white community. There were Asian American students, and thankfully in my high school there was a little bit more diversity. But growing up, I was around classmates that didn't have the same lived experiences as I did. And it's always been interesting to see how much things have shifted in Palatine since I was born here to when I got elected, and even now, the diversity that we're seeing. But I think it's just a testament of like how our communities are ever evolving. And now at this history of, in Palatine, I'm proud to serve as that voice in the legislature. But I got my start in politics when I was 22 years old. So I would argue that I actually started in politics or became more politically attuned when I was a senior in high school. And a little pop quiz for you all. It should be an easy question, but it was 2016, 2017 when I graduated. And what would that coincide with? Trump's election. Yes. So his first election was when I was a senior in high school. And I remember I thought, growing up in Palatine, I felt very involved in the community, felt like I was seen and I was heard by my peers and my educators. And then it was like a shock to me. It was such a big shock to me that someone who was campaigning on things like the Muslim ban could become elected as president of the United States. And I remember when he got elected, I went to school that next day. I spent the night crying because that's when the election results were revealed. Then I went to school the next day, and I felt like I was living in a completely different world where hate was normalized, and I just was naive to it. And I remember thinking, this is the moment where communities like ours can decide what to do. Should we alienate ourselves from politics? Should we step further away? Or do we decide to get more involved? I made the decision to major in poli-sci, political science. And, much to my parents' confusion initially, my mom was always on board. My dad was a little skeptical. He said, Nabeela, do business too. So I went off to Berkeley for my education. I studied business and political science. But I would say that was the ultimate start of my political journey. And it happened as early as, me being a senior in high school.
Did you have any hesitations? I know you mentioned your motivations, right? But do you have any hesitations getting involved? I mean, you're a visibly Muslim woman, right? So I'm thinking right off the bat that might be something that was concerning to you. But anything else, or was that not even a factor?
My identity was a motivator, wanting to see representation, maybe not even elected representation. At that point, it was just, I want to see more Muslims in politics that look like me. I wanted other Muslims to know that we should be involved in this space. So it was a motivator. I think the hesitancy maybe came from, what are the job prospects out there? What can you do with a political science degree? What does that look like? And it's not one of the careers that we talk about growing up, at least in the Desi Muslim community. So that, if there was any source of hesitation, it might have been from that.
Yeah, no, so the next thing I was gonna just ask you about that. Any learning experiences so far? Yeah, how long? It's been what about I think 2 years now. You've been in the legislature. Or...
So I'm in my third year now, but 2 full years that I've been in the legislature. And I think a lot of learning. I think it is hard to know what exactly a state representative does until you're doing it, and then maybe you could explain it to people around you. But campaigning for it, I knew that there was this advocacy part, right? Like there are values that I have, there are issues that I care about. That was me communicating to voters what I wanted to work on. But it does look very different in practice. How do you actually take an ambitious idea and make it a law? Who are the stakeholders that you have to engage? What is the political climate looking like? Is it amicable to this kind of change? And I think my first term, I learned a lot of lessons with the bill that I was working on, which prohibited price gouging of off-patent and generic drugs, like Martin Shkreli tried to do with Daraprim a few years back. And just, trying to, getting into, conversations about the constitutionality of the bill, having to engage with the Attorney General's office, things that I may not have foreseen, but suddenly was having to deal with. But I will say, like, if there is a job in the world where you are working on a number of issues and having to, having curveballs thrown at you, and if you like that, then this is the job for you. Because I have learned so much in these past 2.5 years. I feel like I've aged to 40 years old at this point.
No, definitely. I can imagine. It's a one of those positions. I mean, it's a servant position, right? Like you are serving your community, and in that capacity, you're having to hear from so many different people about so many different issues that are impacting their daily lives. I'm sure there's things that you probably never thought of, right? That on a day-to-day basis, are affecting a certain group of people in a certain part of town, and how you're having to judge and assess all of those things, right? What's in the best interest of everyone, or the majority maybe, right? And who's going to be affected the least, right? So definitely that is a lot to think about. It's a responsibility, definitely that you have. But can you tell us a little bit, give us a little bit insight on your day to day, I guess, like in terms of your responsibilities for the constituency that you serve, as well as the campaign part of it, and how you kind of manage all of that? Like, how does that all work?
Definitely. And they're supposed to be, ethically pretty separate. You have your government side, and then you have your campaign side. And for those of you that don't know, the Illinois House of Representatives, you are on a 2-year cycle. So you have to get elected every 2 years by your constituents. And, some changes in that is that they redraw maps for what your districts look like every 10 years. So things in this world are ever evolving. But especially I just finished my third legislative session, alhamdulillah, and it ended on May 31st of this year. And typically our legislative session runs from January through May. So between that time, we're working on legislative ideas, things that maybe people have asked us to work on, bills that have come from constituents in the district. And we're working through the legislative process, filing the bill, getting it heard in committee in the House, voting it on the House floor, sending it to the Senate for that process, and then ideally on its way to the governor for a signature. While we're doing that, we're also working on the state budget. So this past year, we passed a $55 billion state budget. There's always a lot of conversation about the amount of money, the revenue that's coming into the state, where we're spending that money, and then even like the pressing needs that we have throughout the state of Illinois. And one thing that I've learned is there's a lot of short-term thinking in politics where, there decades before me, there have been people in power that have underinvested in certain ways in the state, whether it's supporting communities with developmental disabilities or education funding, that have now resulted in us trying to clean up that. And it's tough because you can't fix everything. Once you start kicking the can down the road, the problem will just grow bigger and bigger and bigger. So one thing I've come to appreciate from my time in politics is the need to think long term, even though we are constantly operating on these 2-year cycles. And the concern of a 2-year cycle ties into the second part of what you mentioned is the campaigning. So you're in office for 1 year, and then that same year, you're already starting to collect petition signatures to get your name back on the ballot for the upcoming election. So I just got reelected in November of 2024. The next legislative session started January. We just finished in May. And now in August, I'm having to circulate petitions again to get on the ballot for the following November. So, there's always debates about term limits. There's always debates about how short our terms are. But I do think a problem that we face in politics is the quick turnaround makes you constantly thinking about, what's next. And I think that might sometimes result in policies that may not be for the greater good, but might be good for the short term, which causes issues long term.
Okay.
Or if I could, I think, Nabeela, just to get back to your background, and are your parents originally from Hyderabad? Are they Pakistani or what?
They're from Hyderabad, India. Yes.
Okay.
Did not know there was a Hyderabad, Pakistan until after I got elected, and I was like, "Oh, okay." Didn't know there were two, but they're
True.
from India.
Got it. And the reason I ask that is because it's so inspiring to see that one generation removed, your parents come here, and now you are in office, elected, mashallah, hijabi. And to me, that is the storyline here, to be honest with you. I speak to a lot of kids in my work and out of choice as well, because I want to inspire them. And I often talk about the role models out there, right? And so I always start off with them. I always start off with our kids, whether it's Islamic Foundation or Bridgeview Mosque Foundation. I always say to them, who here is an American? And I sense this sense of like confusion with the kids. Like, what are they asking me? All these kids were born here, pretty much, you can tell. But then they still identify, sometimes they say, oh, I'm Pakistani, I'm et cetera, et cetera. And my own experiences, having moved here as a young kid, having come from the Middle East, I believe that despite our current situation where there's a lot of divisiveness, and we're going to get into that in a bit, I love the fact that people like you, mashallah, are successful. They've been elected. My own wife, who looks not much different than you, much older, but not much different than you, we're Hyderabadi as well, rose to one of the most senior legal positions at one of the quintessential American companies, McDonald's, like one of the most senior positions in Europe. She was the top lawyer in the US at one point. And I share those inspiring stories like yours and my wife, and there are many others in our community with our kids to say, look, you might feel otherized. You might feel like this is not a welcoming place at times for us, but the opportunities are there. And I think that's what continues to inspire me about the US. My own experiences, again, having moved here, I grew up in the Middle East, in the GCC countries, and experienced a good amount of racism. And when I came here, I finally felt like I belonged. And so I think that is probably the greatest story we can share, which is, despite what's going on right now, we want people to know that you will, inshallah, Allah's blessing and a lot of hard work like you put in, be successful. And so along those lines, I do want to ask you, like, what has been sort of the positive that's come out, despite what you might see and what we hear, the public, if you will, in the press about parties aren't getting along, etc. Have you seen some successes, some wins where people have worked across the aisle for the better of the people?
Certainly.
Politicians have worked across the aisle for the better of the people, I mean.
100%. And I think really quickly, just touching on the previous point you made, I remember early on when I was deciding whether or not to run for office, that was a very obvious thing. My dad was afraid. He was afraid about his, alhamdulillah, my parents supportive in everything I do. They're very, very, they're the reason why I'm in office now. First Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then my parents. And I remember one of the early conversations, my dad was terrified. He's like, people might treat you poorly. The way that you look, you wear a hijab, like, is this the right choice? And in my mom, I remember she was like pushing back, and she's like, of course it's the right choice. Illinois doesn't, and I didn't even know my mom knew this, but she's like, Illinois does not have a single Muslim in elected office in the state legislature. And she's like, when are we going to get the opportunity to elect someone like you, like a young Indian woman, someone who wears a hijab, someone who clearly cares about these things, can do it? When are we going to get that opportunity? And I remember thinking, growing up, my parents, alhamdulillah, they voted, but it's not like they have ties to any political background, not here, not in India. They're your average, immigrants to America, citizens here that are excited to go and vote. But beyond that, and, aware of political affairs, but beyond that, not super political. So I was thinking, here's my mother, obviously a grown woman, and she so desperately desires representation. And she wants to see it. And she sees her daughter as a pathway to achieving it. So I'm thinking in that moment, I was like, we as a community deserve representation too. And obviously representation does not need to look like, she looks exactly like me, or she's the same exact person, but or like even values policy wise. You don't need to agree with me 100%. I think it's very important we don't hold politicians to the caliber of an Islamic scholar. That's something I strongly believe we shouldn't do. But I think knowing that like we people who look like us, or people that are in the minority, can achieve spots in these spaces. And if my mom is desiring that representation, I can't imagine how many people in Illinois, whether they've realized it or not, are also excited or desiring that representation. So it's exciting to even hear about your wife, and even to see the pride that you feel in seeing Muslim women be elevated and be recognized for our smarts. And one other thing I will say is, it's awesome to be young in this space. It's awesome to be able to, I've spoken at some schools at CPS, Syed, MEC, I've talked to young people there, and it's awesome to see little girls who, high school was, now it feels like it's been a long time. I'm 26 now, and high schoolers will make it very clear that we are not the same, even if we're from the same generation. But there are obviously differences, but I'm like, I used to be you not too long ago. So I hope, inshallah, people see that and they feel like this is possible. But even going to your second question about bipartisanship and being able to work across the aisle, I think that also ties into whether or not people want to do this kind of work. They see politics and it seems like this hyper polarized thing. And I won't be naive. I won't mislead anyone. It is incredibly polarized right now. This feels like the most polarized it has been. I wrote my college thesis on polarization in communities. This just feels like anything unlike we've seen before. And, some of it's justified and some of it is for media. And that's what we see. The headlines we see is always talking about the division, but it doesn't cover the fact that most of my bills have been passed with bipartisan support. Most of the bills that we pass in Springfield are passed with bipartisan support. There's so much that we agree on, simple fixes to the state, simple, big, even big ideas. We passed a bill regarding pharmacy benefit managers and reform there. That passed with bipartisan support. It's often the polarizing issues that get the attention. They get the media clicks, and people profit off that division too. So it's hard when we take a step back to know what's reality and what's not, when even our systems, our communication systems, media, the algorithms on Twitter and Facebook, and not Twitter, it's X now, but X and Facebook and Instagram, they are tied to virality, and that's what people want to put out there. So I would even encourage folks that obviously there's polarization, there's no denying that, but take stuff with a grain of salt and talk to your community members, because you might realize that even if your community members support this person for president or this independent candidate, there might be more in common than different.
Right. We personally donated to your campaign the first time you ran, but I will say that I wasn't sure you were going to win. But we were so ecstatic and pleasantly surprised that you did. It was incredible. And what it made me realize is that when you speak to the issues that matter to people, they're going to vote for you. Obviously, Palatine is not Muslim majority, or your district is not Muslim majority. So what you got elected, and I think your second election was even better, stronger than your first one. It goes to show to me that when you speak to issues that matter to people, and it's not just about our community. Sure, we have our unique sets of issues that we deal with. We've got foreign, without getting political, there's a lot going on globally and domestically that we personally feel that we wish we had more say, more representation. But my true belief is that when you try to solve America's problems, whatever they may be, a majority do come around and they're like, I don't care what the person practices, what they wear. And so it sounds like that has been your experience. So I'd love to hear about your realization when you got elected. Like, what was the averages? Like, how many people crossed over, or how did that work, first and second election?
Yeah, so it's hard to tell exactly, but like anecdotally, I remember, well, this actually happened my second election. And I guess I'll take a step back. I'll talk a little bit about the election results. But in my first election, this district was, initially they said it was a +7 Republican district. So I completely understand your skepticism when you were like, okay, I'm going to support her, but it might not work. But even the commitment to support with that uncertainty obviously goes for any political race, but was especially heightened for our political race, given the fact that this was a Republican held seat and we were flipping the district. But I think, so my first election, we won by 6 points. So I got 53% of the vote. And I remember that first election, I had folks coming up to me on election day where they had said they had never voted for a Democrat ever in their life. And this man that I was talking to was 83 at least. I think he he's 83 now. He said he was like 81 then. And I remember him, an older white gentleman, came up to me and I was like, goodness, is he going to be angry at me? But he's like, I've never voted for a Democrat ever before in my life, but I am voting for you. And I, like, that moment, I was at the polling location. So he was heading in to vote. I was 100 feet away from the door, where I can legally be. I was just greeting folks. And I remember thinking, what a surreal moment. Like, even if I don't win this seat, and I'm trying to make sure I'm emotionally preparing myself in these moments before the polls close. I'm like, this man who had never voted for someone of my party ever before somehow cast a ballot for a 23-year-old hijab wearing Muslim woman. And that to me spoke volumes. This past election, the similar situation, a guy wearing a veteran hat, very angry. There are judge candidates trying to hand him brochures. And he's like, I don't care about these judges. They're all corrupt. They're all corrupt. He's like, I'm here voting for one person. Actually, two people, Trump and Nabeela. And then he sees me, he recognizes me, and he shakes my hand and he walks in to vote. And I said, there were Republican judge candidates, they're Democrats, and they're all looking at me and they're like, what the heck? And I was like, I don't know. But alhamdulillah, like, I think about those moments and I'm like, these are surreal moments. In the first election, we won by 6 points. In 2024, where we saw a lot of seats flip, a lot of smaller margins for Democrats, we ended up doubling our margin to 12 points. And I think that was the biggest for any kind of district where it was a tight race like it had been last time, a purple district. This was the largest growth in margin that anyone has seen across Illinois for the 2024 election year in a purple district. And I'm like, once again, we did that with a young Muslim, as the candidate with a name like Dila Sayed. And sometimes I have to step out of my own shoes, try to see it from the outside perspective to think about how crazy it is. But subhanAllah, it goes to show that when you talk about policies, when you talk about issues that people care about, and when you show up at their doorstep and you knock and you say, what matters to you? It ties to me so closely with our faith, wanting to listen to people out of genuine care, wanting to look after your neighbors, no matter their beliefs, no matter what they look like, wanting to make sure that they are taken care of. And when they feel stress, they at least feel heard by people. They're like, I see you. I hear your stress. When you can't afford prescriptions, like, I care about that. And, my hope has been that, like, we see so much about politics and it seems like politicians aren't being genuine. And I feel those examples on a day-to-day basis when I interact with people. And I'm like, why are you in politics? You don't care about people. But I hope that people start seeing campaigns like ours and, like, they genuinely feel the care. And I think, we're seeing that in a number of cases across the US where candidates that maybe people didn't think had a shot are suddenly winning because people can see and hear their passion. And they'll show up in these communities, and they'll show up over and over again until people get sick and tired, and then we'll finally vote for them.
I think your veteran story is exactly the story I was hoping to hear when UIF approached me and said, would you talk to Nabeela and get us on? Because that's the kind of stuff you don't hear, right?
Yeah.
And I want our future generations to really know that there are people who will stick by principles. So alhamdulillah, it's a beautiful story. And I think that, rule of law, personally, again, to me is critically important. I came over and I learned about the Constitution. And I think our country it has its faults. We know that. Like, there have been a lot of historical issues, whether it was African Americans, Native Americans, Jewish Americans, Chinese Americans, the list just goes on and on, Latino Americans, and continue to this day. But there are instances where it renews your faith in democracy, and I think that my hope squarely lies in that promise of America, right? Democracy, I think a lot of us, including me, took for granted. Like it's almost like it'll be there forever. And that's not the case. I mean, it's not self-executing. It somebody has to protect democracy. And I think that my big hope for our next generations, like you and even younger, is that we rise up to the challenge of what America is going through, which, regardless of the side of the aisle you're on, whether you're Republican or Democrat, it doesn't matter. But there are certain fundamental principles of our sort of the agreements that we've all come to in terms of equal rights, equal due process, protection, rule of law, all that. I think that maybe it's time for our future generations to step up and help solve what's hurting right now in America. And I think that, inshallah, will give us more, I would say, should really cause us to join the system, going back to what Omar said at the beginning about why our kids should get involved, why our community should care. And again, it's not all just about our rights, me, what about my issues, but it's how do we solve the various issues. And again, because we're not endorsed, not we meaning UIF, this is not about an endorsement to you or endorsement of any particular issues. I think there are certain significant concerns with, for example, where it's gun violence in America. There are certain very significant challenges that impact everyone, right? A past shooter doesn't go in and ask which party you belong to. They just shoot. So I think that we can be part of the problem, inshallah, part of the solution to the problems. And that's what's going to give us, inshallah, future successes in your realm and in corporate, et cetera. I'd like to hear, and I know we're short on time, you've got another meeting as well, and time flies by always. I'd love to hear, like, and this is a very hard question, but it's worth asking, is from your vantage point, where do you see us going as a nation, as a state, and as a nation? Do you think there will be sort of a reckoning where people will finally be like, enough is enough, and we need to work together? Or what are your thoughts, predictions, just in general about it?
Yeah, I think, and trying to avoid getting too partisan in this, but I think there's been clear examples of attacks on our institutions, mass layoffs in areas where, like, maybe we shouldn't be laying off people at this rate. I know I have friends that were working in government that are no longer working there, questioning of, like, citizenship. And I think that's a big thing for our community too, where if I have people texting me wondering if, their parents were not citizens when they were here, but then they were born here, they're citizens, and their parents became naturalized later. Where do they stand in this? And I think there are significant concerns coming down from the federal level where we're like, I don't know what the future of America looks like in a few years, but I think it is our responsibility to try to be part of these solutions, whatever they might look like, whether it's, gun violence, as you mentioned, like if that's a space that you're interested in. And I've seen so many, alhamdulillah, women in our space that have become very passionate about it because they're sending their kids to school and they're afraid. They're afraid of sending their kids to school in America. And, we're seeing these moments of activism within our community, coalescing around political causes, coalescing around issues that they care about, but then also trying to build strong institutions here internally, like our masjids. And I think, there's always a debate in the Muslim community. Oh, we have so many masjids, why are we doing that instead of donating to political causes? And I'm not going to get into that, but I think the role of having these community spaces and trying to create activities for youth, keep them out of trouble, keep them out of things that might harm them in the future, away from guns or, people that might have guns. Like there are ways in which I think our community is trying to establish itself in America in a way that fits into the fabric of American society, but also preserves our individuality and our ability to practice our beliefs and, raise our kids the way that we want to raise them and be proud of our identity. And, this is always a fun little thing for me to think about. But like when I went to Fremd High School, at one point I was the only hijabi, and now, man, they got all these girls wearing hijabs at Fremd. It's so cool to see that, like, even the change that we're seeing among young Muslims in America. But so, I kind of lost where the question was going because I got excited about young hijabis. And, but I think there will be a point where like we have to figure out how to put country above party. And do things that are just basic decency. And I think the biggest things that I view as impediments to that are money and politics. Corporate PAC money dictating where how people should vote, and people acting and operating in fear of having primary challengers or having millions of dollars spent against them if they take a stance that they believe is morally right. I think we're seeing that be a big issue. We're seeing, the constant things that are coming out of the federal government also be an issue where, if a candidate that the president doesn't necessarily like gets the nomination, there are suddenly calls for deportation or examining, the status of this candidate. And I think there are actively things being done to intimidate and to scare. But I do think there are so many in our community that also, when I'm thinking about the role of our community at this time, there are many in our community that are very privileged, like myself. I'm my parents, when I was born, were citizens. They already went through that process. I am a citizen and I am in public office. Like, what can I do with my privilege to pursue justice, not just for me or for the Muslim community, but for everyone? Because I do strongly believe that when you uplift one community, you uplift everyone, or when you uplift everyone, you also uplift our community too. And it's a vice versa relationship. But I don't know if I exactly answered the question. I went in several different directions, but I feel like that was true politician manner.
It was very good. That's frankly what we want to hear is your experiences and sort of the inspirations of what. So Omar, I know again, I'm mindful of time. When I turn it over to you, and I'm happy, I've got a lot of questions which I'll hold for.
Yeah, no, I know there's a lot we could cover, and this isn't one of those political podcasts, right? So we're not going to get into. I have a lot to say. I have to hold back a lot too because I'm very into politics myself. So I had a lot of quips and jokes to make, but we're we want to keep it. Yeah, we really have to. I have to bring it in a little bit, it's part of my nature to have good fun with these things in a sense, but. It is a very important topic, right? In the sense that our community, one of the things that we talk about at UIF, right, is from the Islamic financing side of it is that, we're kind of going from a phase of Islamic financing 1.0 to 2.0, but our community in general has gone through, several phases, right? Like my parents came here in the early 70s. I was born in the early 80s. I'm in my 40s now. I have a family, little kids, etc. And, seeing all the transformational changes that our community has gone through, I saw an email recently from one of the Muslim civil rights groups, celebrating, I think their 35th, 36th year. And, another organization over 50, I think their 60 something year anniversary. Right. And, our institutions have been here for a long time. That's one of the testaments of our community, is that we have built foundations in this community. We have children born here, but we also have relatives who are buried here, right? My father is buried here in Houston, Texas, 4 hours south from where I am in Dallas. So this is our home, right? And this is, we're not going back, like that's not happening. You go to the davets, right? And everyone's talking about politics, India and Pakistan and this and that, or whatever country people are from. Nobody's going back, right? Everyone's staying here, and this is home, right? And we need to make it home and do our best. And really, what you said, Nabeela, about this position that you're in, being from almost like an Islamic type of position, right? I think of like the Prophet ﷺ and him, being a servant, a human leader, not just for himself, right? And he had a multi-religious group of people with him in Medina. And, that is the responsibility of the Muslim here in America, right? Is to make this a better place, right? For all people. And it's great to see that you've succeeded there. And you got the veteran vote, it seems like, too, which is great to see. And, congratulations to you on a second term, and inshallah, many more terms ahead. I did want to ask you before we wrap up, but any future personal plans, like beyond where you are right now, like that you plan on doing? Like, is politics like up to a certain timeline for you, or do you see this going into I don't want you to let the cat out of the bag if there's any surprises, right? But what does the future have in store for Nabeela Sayed?
Well, I'm always just looking for, like, honestly, I love this job. I think like the state is just such an incredible place to be. I total in my time in Springfield so far, I've passed 21 laws signed by the governor. They're all there. And I just think, like, the ability to make laws that actually benefit people, it's such a privilege. So alhamdulillah, I love my job, and I want to continue doing this work in the state legislature for some time. But I always say never. You never know. I didn't think at 23 I would end up as a state representative. I don't think a lot of people did, but it's important to be open to those opportunities too, inshallah. But I think this next political cycle is going to be very interesting for many communities across Illinois. It's a very crazy time in Illinois politics. So it'll be interesting to see even how our community engages this upcoming election cycle, because it's ever evolving, but we've been here for some time. And I think a lot of our community is feeling loud and proud about making sure our voices are heard in the upcoming election.
Where I loved your comment. I do a lot of work with Muslim Public Affairs Council. MPAC is one of the premier civil rights 501c3 organizations in the U.S., based out of LA and DC. And one of their co-founders, Maher Hathout, said, he was one of the thought leaders. He said when he started MPAC that home is not where my grandparents are buried, but where my grandkids are growing up, right? And I think it really squarely hits upon what you said, which is this is our home, and this is certainly, frankly, the best odds I have in terms of success, both professionally, liberty personally. And I know right now personal liberties are under attack in many different spheres, but I couldn't see myself, whatever little I do, or Representative Syed doing this work or getting elected anywhere in the Middle East, it just wouldn't happen. Most of them not even democracies. And the state of Pakistan or any other country for that matter, India, about whatever. So I think that, I hope, if nothing else, this discussion will remind people that, yeah, sure, that it's tough, but we have some rules and laws, inshallah, that we all should protect. And the other thing I'll say, again, from a point of inspiring people, is when I went to law school, I barely even knew what a federal clerkship was. Clerkship is when you go work for a federal judge or a state judge. And then the federal clerk, almost like an apprentice, if you will, for the top judges, they go on to become future judges. It's the best way to get trained and influence. And now we have many former Supreme Court clerks who are Muslim. And those, inshallah, my hope is that in the next 5, 10, 20 years, we see a Muslim as one of the Supreme Court justices.
Absolutely.
And so that is the possibility of our community. And I think that inspiring young leaders like Representative Syed, I think can hopefully be there to, and again, I'm so glad you joined this podcast because your story will get out and inspire others. So I'll cede it back in the interest of time. I know you have to go to another meeting, but I'll stop there, Omar, and turn it back over to you.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Faiyaz. Thank you, Nabeela. So before we wrap up, we always like to ask our guests, so Nabeela, any recommendations, podcasts, books that have inspired you that you feel, our listeners should check out?
Yeah, I think this is coming from like more of a Gen Z perspective where I think like social media and your phone is consuming a lot of your life. So I've focused my consumption sometimes outside of politics where, in ways to help me improve, what my work and what I'm doing. So like books that actually the Speaker of the House recommends, Start with Why. Determine like what is your purpose, why are you doing this work, whatever you might be doing, or try to help you identify it. Even Atomic Habits, I know that's a basic book, but like those are some of my more recent reads, just to figure out how I could even change day-to-day things to be a person that is less consumed by social media and their phone, as I feel like anyone my age is dealing with. And people of all ages. I saw my dad on TikTok the other day and it was not good. But trying to change those little habits. A podcast I'm not super into, but I will say you should check out this podcast because this is one of the best around.
Atomic Habits, actually a book we did cover. One of our first episodes that when we started this podcast was going over that. Ijaz, who's who I mentioned, Faiyaz's brother, right? He's a very avid book reader, likes audiobooks, reading books. So he's always encouraging our sales team here at UIF to read books, get smarter, get better, improve yourself, etc. So definitely, I think that's a great book. I think anyone who watches this show probably heard this, many times before. But to wrap it up, Jazakallah khair, thank you guys so much for coming on. I think definitely a lot of our community members who are going to listen to this or watch this podcast, really, I think they're going to see that what a remarkable story that is, right? And like you said, kind of purplish, reddish kind of district. You never know what happens, right? Unless you try. And I think that's at the end of the day, that is the American story for a lot of immigrants, the kids like myself, yourself, all of us, right, who grew up here and had immigrant parents. That this is our country, this is our home. It belongs to us just as much as anybody else, and we have a responsibility at the end of the day to see that the best is done for all people here. Definitely all the best wishes to you, inshallah, Nabeela, for your future success and your campaign. Faiyaz, thank you so much for stepping in today and helping me kind of moderate the show today and giving us your expertise. I'm sure we'll look to have you both on again in the future. We'll pretty much wrap it up there. So thank you again, guys.